Hey everybody, Professor Gassimi here. In this component of the lecture, we will be discussing some of the essential elements of HTML. I do want to emphasize that as we go through this lecture, there is a set of corresponding readings that I strongly encourage you to take a look at. These readings provided some of the source content that you will see in the following slides, and what's great about the readings is that they also contain some interactive exercises that you can use to practice the things that we cover today in the lecture. So let's get started. The HTML documents at their kind of simplest, from a content perspective, will contain headings and paragraphs. Now, you already saw some examples in the previous component of this lecture about the paragraphs. So let's talk a little bit about the headings and what they mean. You can see here I have sort of two sections of the screen. On the left-hand side, I have some HTML. And on the right-hand side, I have a document that was rendered by the web browser. So these are the same thing. It's just that the one on the right was rendered and the one on the left is the raw HTML. And what you can see is that there are a set of tags here, H tags, that are followed by a number of some kind. We've got an H1 here, we've got two H2 here's, and we have an H3 here as an example. What you might notice if you look from the left to the right is that the higher this number is, so when it's a 1, for example, we get a bigger, stronger piece of text that's shown on the right-hand side. And as the number gets smaller, the preeminence of that text also shrinks correspondingly. That's because these H tags are meant to indicate something about the hierarchical importance of the particular statement or content that's contained within the tag. So the most important thing about this document, based on what we have in the HTML, is the crushing bore, and so on. Now, making sure that you actually get these heading numbers right and take advantage of the heading structure is super critical actually when you're writing HTML documents for a couple of reasons that we'll discuss in a minute. Some of the other essential elements of HTML include emphasis and importance. These allow you to, in a standard setting at least, kind of bold and italicize text accordingly. What I'm showing you here on the left is again some HTML. So we have a starting of a paragraph tag, and here at the bottom we have the ending of that paragraph tag. And sort of embedded within this, I have used the emphasis tag to italicize liquid on the right-hand side. And I have used the strong tag, as you can see, to bold the word highly toxic. And as we discussed in the previous lecture, you can nest tags in HTML, right? So I could have a strong tag, as you see here at the bottom, and nested within this is an emphasis tag so that the word die is both bolded as well as italicized. Some other essential tags help you actually formally perform italicization, bolding, and underlining text. This is distinct from strong and emphasis. The functional distinction is that strong and emphasis don't necessarily always have to bold and don't necessarily always have to underline. They could do other things depending on some of your browser's configurations and things of that kind. But the I tag and the B tag will always, for instance, italicize and bold respectively. Okay, again, just to make this concrete, I've shown some HTML text on the left-hand side, the Ruby throating hummingbird, and you can see this is encapsulated by a U tag, which creates an underline in the corresponding visual on the right-hand side. The same goes for the italicized elements on the left, as well as the bolded elements on the left. So you can see that these tags sort of directly control particular stylistic elements that we might use in a word processor, for example. HTML has a concept of lists, and the lists can be both unordered or ordered. So let's go through the unordered list first. You specify an unordered list appropriately through UL, or unordered list. And then within this list, you have multiple list items, or LI tags, and these end up, sort of one at a time, specifying each of the items in the list. When you have an unordered list, obviously it's supposed to reflect that the order of these items don't matter. In this case, some items we want to get from the grocery store. And you can see correspondingly when it gets visualized, something like bullet points is shown. which implies that the order of these items is not important. This is distinguished from an ordered list, which is appropriately uses the OL tag, or ordered list. Again, contains list elements, but here the difference is that the items get a numbering. So do this becomes 1, then turn right becomes 2, and so on and so forth. Another one of the essential elements of HTML, and this is an example of an empty element actually, is the image tag. Okay, it's an empty element because, as you can see on the left, once again, there's no closing tag for this. It's open img, we have some of our attributes, and then we close the img tag. We don't have an additional end tag, which is /img. Okay, that's what makes it an empty element. The thing about img tags is that they should always include not only a source, or it's sort of useless to have them, right? We need to point to an image of some kind we're interested in rendering. In this case, I'm interested in pointing to images dinosaur.jpg. But we also need some alt text. This is useful if, for whatever reason, the user's browser cannot render this particular image that I'm showing on the right-hand side. The alt text will place some replacement text there in place of that. It's also really useful for people that are visually impaired who might want to use your site and don't want to miss out on the content you've generated. Now, image tags have some attributes. We mentioned what attributes were in the previous component of the lecture. It's the stuff that goes inside the tag here. And the attributes of an image tag allow you to control its width as well as its height. In this case, because I've provided no units, the width here is in pixels and the height here is also in pixels. There are multiple units you can use to size these items. We will be speaking about that a little bit later. The generic unit that you use for sizing thing is in pixels on your screen. What you can see here is that as I change the width and the height of the image within the properties here, or the attributes, I get a corresponding change in the visual aesthetic of the image on the right. There are other tags in HTML that allow you to create hyperlinks, and hyperlinks are obviously what makes the web, right? The reason that the internet is interesting is because I can, within a web document, link you to another web document, and that can link you to a third place, and so on and so forth. Creating a link is very simple. You use something called an A tag, as I'm showing you here on the left-hand side. Within that A tag, you include a reference, or an href attribute, with the corresponding location you'd like to redirect the user to when the content enclosed within the A tag is clicked, in this case, my homepage. So this particular HTML block you see on the left would render to, I'm creating a link to my homepage, which again is hyperlinked, will be clickable, and so on. Now, when it comes to practice, or good practice, I should say, I strongly encourage you to add a title to all of your links. This is because, again, it improves readability. It actually helps with searching through your content, and so on and so forth. So it's good practice when you're using actually links to also include a title attribute to say a little bit more about what the particular link is doing. My homepage is sort of vague, right? My homepage that I'm referring to in this context actually semantically is my Dr. Ghassemi's homepage, as an example. Now, importantly, when it comes to hyperlinks, I want to note that any content can be made into a link by wrapping it with the A tag. So it's not just text, you can do it with images too. In this case, as I'm showing here on the left, I have a A tag that's going to redirect me to ghassemi.xyz, which is my personal web page. I've done the thing of putting a title on this. And what I've wrapped within here is a image for actually a teapot that I made some years ago. Okay. And this teapot, as you can see, has the alt tag that describes a little bit more about it. Now, when you're linking to a resource that's going to be downloaded rather than opened in the browser, you can actually use this download attribute to provide a default save file name. So if, let's say, somewhere on your personal web page, you wanted to include a link for people to download your CV, you could just simply use this H tag, provide the location of your CV, either locally on the web server or on a remote location, as I'm showing here, another web address. And then within download, you put the particular file that you're interested in having them download. Now, it's possible to create links that open up also outgoing email messages rather than linking you to a resource, a page, or allowing you to download. Okay? This is also done using the A element, but the distinction is here that you use the mail to URL scheme within the href in order to specify that you're interested in this link actually creating an email that's sent to an individual. What I'm showing you there on the top left of the example is sort of the simplest instantiation of this. I have an A tag. I have some text that I want to be a hyperlink of some kind, send email to Dr. G. And this href says mail to gosm3@msu.edu. So if you click this, it will actually open your mail client, and it will have just an empty message with the to address of that message auto-populated with gosm3@msu.edu. But you can do a lot more actually with this mail to attribute. You can not only put the recipient, as you're seeing there on the bottom, gosm3@msu.edu, but you could add a bunch of CC and BCC and subject and even the body of the message. You could draft the whole thing automatically at the point when the button is clicked through your mail client. One thing to quickly note if you decide to go down this path is a couple of important things. The first is you see this %20. This is a character reference for a white space character in this context. And the ampersand you might notice here separates each of the lines that go into the document. So just sort of keep that in mind if you decide to use something of this kind. HTML also contains elements that are used for creating tables. And I want to note here that tables should be used for tabular data. So the only time you should really use a table is if you have something that needs to be presented in a table. You should not use tables for laying out web pages. That's very 1990s, and it creates all sorts of horrible problems later. So do not try to lay out the structure of your web page using an HTML table. We'll talk about how you can properly structure documents using better, more contemporary tools in a later component of this lecture. The thing you want to know about a table is that it starts and ends obviously with a table tag. And then within table tags, there are these TR tags. These are rows, right? So in this case, you can see I've got one set of TR tags followed by another set followed by a third set. Okay, and what this does is it creates 3 rows, which you can actually see here on the right hand side. We've got one row which has breed and age. We've got another row that has Naki, Jack Russell, and 16, and a third row that has Floor, Poodle, and 9. And within each of these rows, you have the particular values that you want to show. In this case, we've got a white space, as we can see here on the top left of the actual table. We've got then Naki, which you can see here, and Floor, which you can see here, and so on and so forth. One of the attributes within, or elements I should say, within HTML that's useful is the video element. This actually allows you to embed a video within your HTML page. You could, for example, here, like I'm showing on the top right, have a video tag, and you can include the source attribute just like you did with an image, but instead of pointing to an image, you point to a MP4 file that you're interested in playing. In this case, I pulled an MP4 file publicly from the World Wide Web of this video of a rabbit. And we have a binary attribute that you see here called controls that actually will automatically create the same controls that you see on YouTube and other services. So, ways to speed things up, ways to control the volume, ways to control what component of this you're seeing, full screen, and so on and so forth. You can also nest within a video tag, and this is considered good practice, a P tag that gives you some information on the content of the video. This not only provides descriptions for what's there, it makes the content more searchable to search engines and your web browser and so on and so forth, but it's also great practice, again, if somebody might be visually impaired or can't load the asset. There are, of course, many attribute tags that are available for video. You can control the width, the height, you can autoplay them. This is annoying, of course, so I wouldn't suggest it, but you can make it so that the minute someone hits your page, it autoplays. You can control whether it loops or not. Might be useful depending on what you're doing, whether it starts off with the audio muted or not, and whether, like YouTube does, when you first hit that image, before you've clicked the play button, whether you want a poster that sort of shows off the content there. I think it's pretty interesting, actually, that a lot of what you see on YouTube is actually just using this video tag and these attributes, right? You could probably, with very little actual effort, create a very simple version of a site like YouTube. Of course, when it comes to hosting that data and distributing it, that's where it would become a giant monstrosity. But all the attributes are there to do it actually pretty simply. Now, speaking of YouTube, you might notice that there's always a way to enable within YouTube videos some automated transcriptions of content, right? Well, there is a way, if you have a transcription of content, and I suggest, of course, for those who are auditorily impaired, that you consider doing this if you release content. You can use this track actual element within a video tag to indicate whether there are subtitles. And you can actually provide a subtitle script. I'm showing an example of what a subtitle script looks like in VTT format there on the bottom right. In this case, this provides subtitles in Spanish for a viewer of an example video, okay? You probably won't need to do this for anything in this class, but it might be useful for you to know if you do want to embed videos that there is a way to add subtitles using this scripting information. Now, just as there is a tag that helps you with embedding video content into your HTML documents, so too is there a tag for audio elements in your HTML document. And audio works just like video, except that, understandably, it doesn't have a width, it doesn't have a height, and it doesn't have that poster attribute that allows you to kind of put the banner image on top of a video, because it's audio. There's nothing to really, there's nothing visual to it. When you want to create some audio content within your HTML document, you simply specify it with the audio tag. Again, you use the control binary attribute so that you get some of the beautiful standard, the play button, the timer, the volume, and so on. And of course, within this audio, you specify a source. And the source is what's used so that you can, upon clicking the play button, hear the content that's made available. It does have several things in common, as I mentioned, with it does have several things in common with the video, not including the width, the height, and the poster. So you can also, and I think this is actually one of the neatest things about HTML documents, is that just like you can embed a video or audio within them, you can actually embed entire web pages within your HTML document. The way you do that is with a tool called an iframe. And I'm showing you here on the top right an example of that iframe. So you can see here I have first a paragraph tag that says here's an iframe. That shows up here at the bottom. This is then followed by the iframe tag, which contains, in this case, a couple pieces of information. There's first source, and this is the web address of a page I want to embed in my page. So you could do this with, in the example I'm showing you here, brainworks.saigami.org, or any other website insofar as they don't refuse your ability to do that. And within these iframes, you can do things like specify a height, as I've done here. I've made it only 500 pixels in height, and other options like whether you want to allow full screen viewing of this content or not. This is actually pretty useful if you want to incorporate some third-party content into your site. So for example, you might want to have Google Maps, a view of Google Maps within your page. Or if you wanted to monetize your page and you didn't want to use Google AdWords, you could have an iframe that the person who wants to serve the ads, you use to sort of show the advertisement through there. And the advertiser, in that case, it's their job to figure out what the ad is. You just hook onto it using an iframe and display it back to your users. You could do this with to embed commenting systems and all sorts of other neat things from third-party providers into your website. So what I want you to take away from this is that HTML tags can be used to create structured content for your website. HTML supports text, it supports audio, it supports video, and it supports other embeddings like iframes. These HTML tags contain attributes that enable further customization of your elements as well.